My name is Antoine Dubois. I am 45 years old and a true Parisian. At the moment, I am standing at the foot of the Eiffel Tower, looking at the quiet flow of the Seine River, but my thoughts have drifted back to 2 years ago. At that time, my wife Sophie was still with me, and we had made a beautiful vow here. But fate was unfortunate, and a sudden car accident took her away from me forever. I was strolling alone through the streets of Paris, so empty that I could hear echoes inside. Until Jean, my longtime friend and colleague, dragged me to a small cafe near the Louvre. Antoine, you can't go on like this, Jean said. I'll introduce you to someone. That's how I met Amélie Rousseau, a 38-year-old fashion blogger with a typical Frenchwoman's charms. Smart, elegant, and a little bit capricious. We had a great conversation, and her laughter seemed to revitalize my heart after a long period of silence. Over the next few days, our appointments took us to all corners of Paris. On a cruise on the Seine, we watched the lights on both sides of the river. In an outdoor cafe on the heights of Montmartre, we chatted about our aspirations. On a bench in the Jardin du Luxembourg, we snuggled up together quietly, feeling the romantic atmosphere of Paris. One day, 3 months later, Jean invited me to dinner at a fancy restaurant on the Champs-Élysées. Antoine, you and Amélie are doing well, he said with a grin. But bro, I suggest you sign a prenup. I laughed in disbelief. Come on, Jean. I'm not a big star. Besides, Amélie's not that kind of person. Jean shrugged. You're always so trusting. But it's your life, you decide. A week later, I took Amélie to Notre Dame in Paris, where the sun was setting over the Gothic spire. As the sun set over the Gothic spires, I got down on one knee and asked her to marry me. Amélie covered her mouth in surprise, tears welling up in her eyes, and nodded her head vigorously. Our wedding was held at the Palace of Versailles, and Amélie looked like a fairy tale princess in her white dress and diamond crown. When we exchanged rings, I felt like the happiest man in the world. However, fate always likes to play jokes. I never thought that this wonderful beginning would be the prelude to a nightmare, and I'm glad that I followed Jean's advice and signed a prenuptial agreement. After our wedding, Amélie and I moved into a duplex apartment in Montmartre. We could see all of Paris from the floor-to-ceiling windows. I still go to work every day in the La Défense district. As an executive of a famous software company, the work pressure is not small, but when I think of Amélie waiting for me at home, it is worth the hard work. I came home from work one day to find Amélie talking to the camera, recording a fashion vlog. She was recording a fashion vlog, and as I stood in the doorway, I couldn't help but smile as I watched her talk about all the luxury bags and clothes she was wearing. That's my wife, always glowing. Honey, you're back? Amélie noticed me and immediately turned off the camera and gave me a big hug. How was your day? I asked. Oh, don't mention it. Amélie rolled her eyes. You know, the government has come up with new policies that are just crushing us small business owners. I was a little surprised when Amélie became so interested in politics, but I was soon energized by her enthusiasm, and we started discussing the latest social issues. Over the weekend, I took Amélie to the Michelin restaurant at the top of the Eiffel Tower. As the lights came on, the whole of Paris shone beneath us. Antoine, do you think the current tax system makes sense? Amélie asked suddenly. I froze for a moment, not realizing that she would talk about this topic on such an occasion. But since she was interested, I went along with it. We talked about the tax system, social welfare, and immigration policy. We chatted about the tax system, social welfare, and immigration policy. Amélie's views were radical and contrary to mine, but our discussion was always friendly. When I got home, Amélie seemed energized by the discussion. She dragged me into the bedroom, and that night made me realize that even though we disagreed on some points, our bond was still strong. And so the days went by. The seasons in Paris change. The sycamore trees along the Seine from bud to flourish to fall leaves. Under the Arc de Triomphe, tourists come in waves. Bastille Day fireworks light up the night sky. Christmas lights adorn the streets. However, over time, I began to notice some subtle changes as Amélie became more and more obsessed with her social media endeavors, sometimes even forgetting to prepare dinner. Our political discussions became more and more heated, and on a couple of occasions, they almost turned into fights. But I always tell myself that these are just minor problems. After all, what couple doesn't have conflicts? I'm sure our relationship is strong enough to get through these little bumps in the road. If I had known what was coming, I might not have been so naive. But who can foresee the future? I was just basking in my newlywed bliss, unaware of the storm that was brewing. After 2 years of marriage, I started to really feel the change in my life, as Amelie became more and more obsessed with her social media career, spending all her time on her cell phone, scrolling through Instagram and TikTok. What I once thought was a cute little habit now made me feel a little uneasy. One night, I came home earlier than usual to surprise Amelie. I took a detour to her favorite dessert store and bought her favorite macaroons. When I opened the door, I was shocked by the scene in front of me. The living room was a mess, and Amelie was lying on the sofa, concentrating on taking selfies on her cell phone. "Honey, you're back?" Amelie looked up at me and then back down to her cell phone. "Well, I came home early today." I look around. "Dinner?" "Oh, I'm sorry, I was so busy today. I forgot to prepare dinner." Amelie said carelessly, "Why don't we order takeout?" I sighed and silently cleaned up the living room. It wasn't the first time, but I chose to be understanding and tolerant. Over the weekend, Amelie said she wanted to go to a fashion party. I wanted to go with her, but she said it was for industry insiders. So, once again, I was home alone, staring at the TV. Late at night, Amelie returned, smelling of champagne. She jumped at me and started kissing me passionately. I was a little uncomfortable with her forcefulness, but I responded. That night's intimacy felt different. Amelie was unusually aggressive, even aggressive. Afterward, I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling uneasy. The next day was Sunday, and I suggested a picnic in the Jardin du Luxembourg, but Amelie wasn't interested, saying she had to meet a deadline for a video. I went out alone, disappointed. Strolling through the streets of Paris, I couldn't help but reflect on our marriage. Maybe it was too much stress at work? Maybe we needed to communicate more? I decided I needed to talk to Amelie. Back in the neighborhood, I saw Amelie from a distance standing in front of the cafe downstairs from us. Didn't she say she was working from home? I was about to say hello when I suddenly saw a handsome young man walk up to her. I knew him. He was Etienne, a budding movie director who lived next door. I stood across the street and watched them talk. Amelie smiled brightly and patted Etienne on the arm from time to time. I had never seen her so close to anyone else. As I hesitated to go over, Amelie suddenly looked up and saw me. Her expression changed instantly, and she walked quickly towards me. Before I could say anything, she gave me a deep, passionate kiss. I could feel Etienne's gaze, but Amelie seemed to have forgotten him. "Honey, what are you doing here?" Amelie asked sweetly. I just got back from my walk." I stammered. "I thought you said you were going to work from home." "Oh, I just came down for a cup of coffee and happened to run into Etienne," she said lightly. I glanced at Etienne, who waved at us and walked away as if nothing had happened. That night, I couldn't sleep. Amelie's erratic behavior, her closeness to Etienne, her deliberate, passionate kisses, everything made me feel uneasy. But I didn't want to think the worst. Maybe I was just being paranoid? However, fate seemed to have an answer for me. I just didn't know that a bigger storm was coming. That morning, I woke up and Amelie was already out the door. She'd left a note saying she was going to record an important video. I sat at the dining room table, staring at her iPad, which I'd never looked through before, but something inside me made me turn it on, and the password was Amelie's birthday. My hands shook as I typed in my password. The screen lit up and I saw a document that read, "The Perfect Divorce, the Modern Woman's Path to Autonomy." My heart skipped a beat. As I read on, I realized that it was a proposal for a web program that Amelie was going to host, sharing her marital experiences and tips for getting out of a bad marriage. I sat there for who knows how long, until the vibration of my cell phone brought me back to reality. It was an email from the company. I responded with a few words and walked out of the house. The streets of Paris were still bustling with activity, but everything was a blur to my eyes. I walked aimlessly, and before I knew it, I was in the Jardin des Tuileries. Sitting by the fountain, I thought back over the past 2 years, Amelie's erratic behavior, her affair with Etienne. Everything seemed to have an explanation. I came home early one afternoon. The moment I opened the door, I heard an unusual sound coming from the bedroom. My heart sank to the bottom. I walked softly to the bedroom door, took a deep breath, and pushed open the doorway. The sight of Amelie and Etienne entwined together, oblivious to my presence, sent me reeling. I stood there, feeling like time had frozen. Somehow, I pulled out my cell phone and shakily pressed the video button. By the time I realized I was sitting in the car with the steering wheel in my hands, I drove westward, eventually arriving at the Normandy coast. Standing on the edge of a cliff, I looked out over the rough Atlantic. Once, I thought Amelie was everything to me, my second chance after losing Sophie. And now, it's all gone to hell. I pulled out my cell phone, dialed Jean's number, and told him everything. "I need you to connect me with a good lawyer," I said, my voice hoarse. Jean was silent for a moment, then said, "I warned you to be careful, man. But don't worry, I know a great lawyer who will help you." After hanging up the phone, I stood on the beach for a long time. On the way back, I told myself over and over again that this was not the end of the world. I still had a job, friends, and a life. The next morning, I went to the lawyer's office recommended by Jean. The lawyer was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes. I gave her all the evidence, including the heartbreaking video. "Mr. Dubois," the lawyer said after reading the information, "under French divorce law, you have good reason to file for divorce. Moreover, in view of the prenuptial agreement you signed, Ms. Amelie will not receive any compensation." I nodded, feeling a mixture of emotions. I'd never thought of using the agreement, but in hindsight, Jean's advice had saved me. "What do we do next?" I asked. "First, I suggest that you move out of your apartment for the time being," the lawyer said, "and we'll file a formal petition for divorce with the court. In the meantime, you should try to avoid direct contact with Amelie. All communication will be through me." I agreed to the lawyer's suggestion. After leaving the office, I booked a hotel room and went home to pack my essentials. When I opened the door, I was ready to face Amelie. But the house was empty. There was only a note. "Honey, I'm going to Milan for Fashion Week. I'll be back in a week. Love, Amelie." Looking at this note full of lies, I smiled bitterly. After packing up my things, I took a last look around the home that was once full of laughter, and then gently closed the door. As I was walking out of the apartment building, I met Etienne, who gave me a surprised look when he saw the suitcase in my hand. We looked at each other, and he seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he just lowered his head and walked away. I took a deep breath and looked at the familiar streets. After leaving the apartment, I immediately asked Amelie for a divorce, and no matter how much Amelie explained and prayed, I only threw her a cold sentence: "Leave everything to the lawyers and the law. I don't want to hear any more words from you. I don't want to hear any more words from you." And just like that, the divorce process started. The doors of the High Court of Paris opened slowly in front of me. I took a deep breath, straightened my tie, and followed my lawyer inside. Today was the day of my divorce from Amelie, and after months of preparation, it was finally time to face the court. The interior of the courtroom was solemn, with a tall dome and heavy wooden furniture that inspired awe. I sat at the plaintiff's table and saw that Amelie and her attorney were already seated across the room, wearing a black suit and makeup that looked like she was attending a fashion event rather than a divorce hearing. The judge banged his gavel and called the case to order. My attorney began the case with a detailed description of Amelie's infidelity and the evidence I had. I avoided Amelie's gaze when the video was played, but I could still feel her anger and anxiety. It was the turn of Amelie's lawyers to speak. To my surprise, they didn't deny the infidelity, but adopted a strategy one hadn't expected at all. "Your Honor," Amelie's attorney spoke up, "my client did make a mistake, but it all stems from Mr. Dubois' long history of emotional abuse." I looked up in shock and disbelief as Amelie's attorney continued. "Mr. Dubois has taken advantage of his social and financial status to continually suppress my client's personal development. He has denied Ms. Amelie's career pursuits, disparaged her social media efforts, and even attempted to control her social circle." I looked over at Amelie, who looked pitiful with her head bowed and tears in her eyes. At that moment, I realized what a cunning opponent I was up against. My counsel immediately objected, pointing out that the allegations were unsupported by evidence. The judge allowed us to rebut them. My attorney has produced numerous social media screenshots and video clips showing Amelie's lavish lifestyle over the years. If Mr. Dubois is truly oppressing Ms. Amelie, then please explain what all these frequent high-end parties, luxury shopping, and lavish trips are all about. Then, my lawyer showed a video of Amelie in her vlog showing off the birthday present I gave her, an expensive diamond necklace. In the video, she was smiling brightly and showed no signs of being silenced. Amelie's lawyers tried to argue that these were cosmetic, but the judge didn't seem to buy it. Just then, the door to the courtroom was pushed open and Jean walked in, holding a folder. My attorney quickly got up and asked the judge for permission to add a witness on short notice. With permission, Jean was sworn in and began his testimony. He described in detail how he introduced me to Amelie and the changes he had observed in Amelie over the years. Amelie was interested in Antoine's wealth and position from the beginning, Jean said. I had warned Antoine to be careful, but he trusted her too much. Jean also provided some screenshots of Amelie's early social media posts, in which she repeatedly expressed her desire to find a rich man to marry in order to focus on her career. Hearing this, Amelie sprang to her feet and protested loudly. This is all nonsense. Jean, how can you slander me like this? The judge sternly asked Amelie to keep quiet or be removed from the courtroom. Finally, my attorney presented the most crucial piece of evidence, the proposal for the perfect divorce program on Amelie's laptop. When the judge saw the document, his expression became visibly serious. This document clearly shows, my attorney concluded, that Ms. Amelie had a premeditated plan and that her marriage was an elaborate hoax from the beginning, designed for future show results and personal gain. There was a brief silence in the courtroom. I looked over at Amelie, who was pale, with fear and anxiety in her eyes. Eventually, the judge adjourned the hearing and will make a decision after considering all the evidence. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt both exhausted and relieved. The battle wasn't over, but I knew that the truth would come out, and Jean patted me on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry, Antoine, justice will be on your side." Looking at the bright sunshine of Paris, I felt for the first time that maybe this ending wasn't the worst for me. The court finally ruled in my favor that Amelie's cheating within the marriage was established, and with the constraints of the prenuptial agreement, she didn't get any property from me. When the judge announced the verdict, I saw a flash of despair on Amelie's face, but it was quickly replaced by anger. The moment I stepped out of the courtroom, I felt a sense of relief that I had never felt before. The sky in Paris was so blue that it seemed to be celebrating my freedom, and Jean suggested that we go to a cafe by the Seine, which I gladly agreed to. We found an outdoor seat and ordered 2 espressos. Jean raised his cup. "To your new life, my friend." We clinked cups and I took a sip of my coffee, bitter with a hint of sweetness, just like my mixed feelings at the moment. "What's next for you?" Jean asked. I shook my head. "Honestly, I haven't thought about it yet. Probably going to focus on work for a while." Just then, my cell phone rang. It was Etienne calling. I hesitated, but picked it up. "Antoine, I need your help." Etienne's voice sounded panicked. "It's about Amelie." I frowned. "What's wrong?" She won't leave my apartment. She's been living here since your divorce. Now she says she'll marry me, or she'll sue me for raping her. What do I do?" I took a deep breath and felt a headache. Even after the divorce, Amelie was still causing me problems. I spoke coldly. "Etienne, listen to me. This is between you. Amelie and I are divorced, but as someone who has been there, I would suggest that you don't panic or do anything stupid. Maybe you can install cameras in your house and record all of Amelie's behavior just in case something goes wrong. Good luck." After hanging up, I told Jean the situation. He shook his head and said, "Looks like Amelie hasn't given up on her perfect divorce plan." 3 nights later, I was at home reading a book when I suddenly heard a commotion from downstairs. I went to the window and saw police cars parked under Etienne's apartment building, their flashing lights illuminating the entire street. I immediately went downstairs to check out the situation. The police were shoving someone into a squad car, and I recognized it as Amelie. Her hair was cut short, dyed blue, and she looked like a completely different person. Etienne stood off to the side, with visible scratches on her face. "What happened?" I asked one of the officers. "Domestic violence," The officer replied. The lady attacked her boyfriend and tried to set a fire. Luckily, we got there in time. I looked over at Etienne, and there was fear and relief in his eyes. Thank you, Antoine, he said. If you hadn't suggested the cameras, I'd probably be in jail right now. Watching the police car go away, I felt a pang of fear. If I hadn't realized Amelie's nature in time, I might be the one lying in the ambulance right now. The next day, I took a day off and decided to relax. I jogged along the banks of the Seine, feeling the early morning breeze. When I ran near the Jardin du Luxembourg, I stopped for a break and sat on a bench to watch the Parisians on their morning walk. A young woman sat down on the bench next to me, looking sunny in her tracksuit and ponytail. Wonderful morning, isn't it? She smiled. I nodded. Indeed. We chatted for a while, and she said she was a middle school teacher who came here every morning to run. We exchanged contact information and made a date to run together in the morning some other day. As I walked home, I felt something slowly revive inside me. Maybe this was the beginning of a new life? I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew that whatever happened, I would face it with more maturity and caution. Back home, I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking all of Paris. The Eiffel Tower shone in the distance, and the Seine River flowed quietly. I took a deep breath and felt the energy and charm of the city. I picked up my cell phone and sent Jean a message. Are you free tonight? I'll buy you a drink. Quickly, he replied, sure, see you at the usual place. I put on a smile. Life is always full of surprises, but as long as we keep hope and courage, we can always find our own happiness. I stepped out of my house in the glow of the setting sun to welcome the nightlife of Paris and a new beginning in my life. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.